Tonight, a gruesome massacre in the Philippines, the country's worst political violence in modern history, and the deadliest single attack on journalists ever. Good evening, everyone. I'm Christiana Manpour, and welcome to the program. At least 18 reporters are among 57 people who've been killed in a massacre in the Philippines. The Committee to Protect Journalists says that this year the Philippines has become the most dangerous place in the world for journalists. The killings come amid tense elections there, and grieving relatives blame a rival clan with links to the government. As protesters demand tough action against the killers, the government has declared a state of emergency in the southern Philippines, which is also where local Islamic militias operate. Joining me now, Maria Ressa, a leading journalist in the Philippines and a former CNN reporter. Maria, let me ask you first. What on earth spurred this massacre in southern Philippines?
Well, certainly it was unexpected because it is the worst election-related violence this country has ever had in history. Certainly, as you pointed out, the worst, the most violent incident of violence against journalists. What spurred it? One man who wanted to file a certificate of candidacy, nomination papers to run for provincial governor. He was trying to file the certificate of candidacy in a clan, in an area where his political rival it was a stronghold of his political rival. And when he was warned not to go, he thought that it would be safe to send women in his family, close friends, and they actually asked journalists to go with them, essentially as protection. Well, that wasn't protection enough, and what we saw happen on Monday was the killing of, at this point, about 57 people in one shot in broad daylight. It was a very brazen act that shocked the country.
Was there any possibility that it had anything to do with the struggle against the Islamic militias there?
At this instance, no, although the situation that created this did have something to do with the struggle against the Islamic militias. What we've seen in the past is that the political warlords, these clans, were actually used by the government to help in the fight against the Muslim insurgencies. In this instance, it's the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, and the family that's been pinpointed by authorities as being behind the killings, the Ampatuan clan, is actually had worked with the government in the past to help fight the MILF.
Maria, the CPJ has just labeled the Philippines as the single most dangerous place for journalists. What is it about the situation there that makes it so difficult to cover the news?
I think part of it is the uncertainty of where the danger is coming from. Christian, this isn't the first time that's happened. In 2003, right when the conflict in Iraq was starting, the Philippines was labeled the most dangerous place for journalists, and then Iraq bypassed it in succeeding years. Here, what you're seeing is it's not like NATO warfare when you're working in the streets of Mindanao or in the streets of Manila. You're facing conflicts not just from Muslim rebels, you're from the NPA, the communist rebels. You're also dealing at times with a government that moves against journalists. In 2006, for example, we had several journalists, half a dozen journalists arrested in a one-day siege, essentially journalists who were trying to cover an attempted coup. So the danger comes at you from different sides, and I think the worst part is that so far, in the last 8 years, out of 74 journalists who have been killed, only 4 cases have found resolution. So it's created a certain sense, a culture of impunity.
I was going to ask you about that. Is there any pressure, is there any sense that the authorities, the judicial process is moving against, or can be persuaded to move against, the killers of these journalists?
It's certainly moving very slowly, and there is pressure that's being placed on the government. Journalists are starting to come together to try to push for justice in this situation. But so far, again, justice is very slow. But the justice system in the Philippines is only one of the problems it's had. That problem is connected to endemic corruption. So as the country is struggling for transparency and accountability, for a government that is both transparent and accountable, journalists are doing their best to do their jobs, to hold both the public and the private sector accountable in as safe a manner as possible.
Maria, what is it that goes untold now? What is it that the world can't know and can't hear because of the threat to Philippine journalists?
I think part of the problem is the culture of fear. For example, now in Maguindanao, if there is no sense of justice there, if somehow it moves too slowly, the journalists who are covering it, the story are going to be, there will be a chilling effect of sorts. Here's the problem that you're also seeing. The rebels essentially in Mindanao can change sides. You've got the MILF, who one day can join the Abu Sayyaf and one day can join the Jemaah Islamiyah, which is a regional group. They switch hats. But the same thing is happening on the other side. In many ways, in Maguindanao, you have the police, the Philippine National Police, who by day are with the government, with local government as the police, but at night they'll take off their hats and then they'll join the private armies of some of these warlords. And that's the difficulty. Who is going to maintain law and order? And as law and order breaks down in these areas, it becomes more difficult for journalists to go into these areas and really give voices to the people who are living in fear there.
Tell me precisely what it is that gets journalists into such terrible trouble in the Philippines. Is it organized crime? What is it that they're reporting on that nobody wants them to report on?
Christiane, it changes. In this situation, the journalists who were killed were actually going to an event where a candidate was just filing his nomination papers for an election that will happen 6 months from now. That's all they were doing. And yet they died in that process. In other instances, you've got journalists who were caught in local conflicts. You've got, this one is a political election-related violence. You've got clan wars. You've also got the conflict between the insurgents, the Muslim Islamic Liberation Front, the Moro National Liberation Front, and the Abu Sayyaf group, which, as you know, is connected, has been connected to Jemaah Islamiyah and Al-Qaeda. So the conflict comes in different areas. It's a complex situation, and as a journalist working in Mindanao, you have to be able to develop a sixth sense to avoid areas where law and order is so weak that you can't tell where the danger is coming from, and yet continue trying to tell the story of the people who live in those areas and are trying to go about their daily lives.
Well, of course, we wish you all the very best. And to learn more about journalists who've been killed in the Philippines, go to our website, cnn.com/Amanpour.
We're giving you a new radio station.
This has only just begun.